Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Alright, I think we're about ready to get back to a normal Monday length podcast. Actually had some variety to choose from this weekend. And you can probably imagine my opinion on WWE at this point when I decided that I would rather invest my time and energy in watching an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view as opposed to the Elimination Chamber show from Saudi Arabia. So Brock won the WWE title, huh? Fascinating. So with that abrupt Elimination Chamber report out of the way, today's Monday podcast is going to be centered on our somewhat usual format. Of course, we got AEW Rampage to talk about. We have NWA Powerrr, and as I noted just a second ago, our weekend pay-per-view selection for this week is going to be Impact Wrestling No Surrender. The first TNA or Impact Wrestling pay-per-view I've watched since Bound for Glory 2018? 2019? God, whichever show it was that Austin Aries lost the Impact title and then no sold the finish and walked out. So it's been a hot minute, and suffice to say, not a whole lot has changed about Impact in the last 3 or so years in my absence. It is still Impact. 100% without a doubt. Not the Impact from 10 plus years ago when it was just absolute garbage train wreck TV every single week. At least I could laugh at the stupidity back then and get minor enjoyment out of the programming. The stuff I found wrong with that No Surrender show was just, I don't know, kind of left me ambivalent when it was over. But again, we'll get into that later in the program. If you are checking out the Five Starr Wrestling Podcast for the first time, be it on Rumble or YouTube, please make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and like the show for me down below. I'd like to hear your thoughts on any or all topics discussed today. We do shows each Monday and Friday here on YouTube and Rumble, so I highly encourage you to come back and check out the show each week. And, of course, you can keep the bell icon notified to catch when the uploads go up. Before we get into the Impact pay-per-view, let's knock out the two TV programs first, starting, of course, with good old AEW Rampage, my favorite show to talk about every week on the podcast. Yeah, I couldn't even try to sound convincing on that, could I? Apparently, though, this is must-see television every week, or so I've heard. And on this must-see edition of AEW Rampage, we begin with Adam Cole versus 10. And they wonder why viewership remains stagnant and they are not attracting any new eyeballs. We are told during 10's entrance from Excalibur, as we know, 10 has recently been on a path of destruction in AEW. To which I immediately responded with, no, Excalibur, I did not know that. Because I do not watch your garbage dark programming every week, and you never explain anything on the TV show as it is. So no, I don't know that 10 has been on a path of destruction, because A, I don't care, it's fucking 10, and B, the only thing I saw on Dynamite was 10 randomly throwing security geeks around for no reason. And by the way, shouldn't 10 get fined for putting his hands on officials? Once upon a time, wasn't it an unwritten rule in the business where if you put your hands on officials or executive staff or something, you'd get fined or suspended. Not in AEW, I guess. Now you can just beat the shit out of anyone you want and no repercussions for you. So the match was exactly what I figured it would be. Garbage. They do a spot in the early part where Cole wrapped Ten's leg around the ring post and started to work it over. So, of course, what happens 2 minutes later? Well, Ten is holding Adam Cole up in a delayed vertical suplex, completely no-selling the knee that he just had worked on. Of course, it ends up breaking down. They go to the usual back and forth, no-sell stupidity by the end. And Adam Cole, #1 contender for the World Championship at the upcoming pay-per-view, doing a back-and-forth competitive TV match with a job guy in the opening match. And not only does it take him 10 minutes to do it, but he also has to hit a low blow to set up the boom. Because, I don't know, God forbid Adam Cole beats a fucking schlub like 10 clean. Again, this is supposed to get me excited to see Page versus Cole for the world title at Revolution. How? Up next, we had Dante Martin and Powerhouse Hobbs in the qualifying match for the Face of the Revolution ladder match. And it really hit me watching this match. Are they really just ghosting the entire unfinished story with Dante Martin, Lio Rush, and Matt Sydal? I know Leo's pretty much gone from AEW now, but I don't ever remember them even bringing that part of the story to any kind of conclusion. The only thing I remember is Dante signed a contract to join Team Taz, and then he swerved them in the Diamond Ring Battle Royal, and now we're pretty much back to square one with Dante all over again. He's just another dweeb on the show. Matt Sydal has completely fallen off the face of the earth. Leo's out of the equation. Jay Lethal, I guess, is doing his own thing now. So Dante's back to having no friends. And meanwhile, Team Taz is still pissed at him. Again, just so you know that I don't forget all of AEW's previous stories that they never follow up on. That said, match was alright. Hobbs is a megastar waiting in the wings. Dante's a guy that does a lot of flips. Dante basically took 80% of the match, made a big comeback at the end. And I was pleasantly surprised by the finish. I was totally expecting Dante to go over in this match, especially when you factor in that they've already got 2 power guys booked for the ladder match already, and, not so much in terms of the Jeff Hardy Spider-Man stunt guys. But when Hobbs hit that spinebuster on Dante and got the clean pin, I gave that the old Tim Allen home improvement reaction. Huh? Of course, I couldn't do it as good as Tim could. And trust me, I'm not complaining about Hobbs going over. I've sat here for months on this show and bitched about the fact that AEW can never seem to shit or get off the pot with Hobbs. Probably because Tony Khan spends more time fapping off to Orange Cassidy. And obviously, I don't expect Hobbs to win that match at the pay-per-view, but fuck it, at least he's on the pay-per-view. So, decent TV match with a surprisingly good finish. Following that, we got the word that Jade Cargill is defending her TBS title against The Bunny. Yeah. The Serena Deeb 5-minute challenge was exactly what it needed to be. Beat a girl in 2 minutes with a hold. Didn't need any fluff or anything. Obviously, it's building towards something big eventually. Whether that's Sheeta's return or a new debut. Guess we'll see the direction they go. I actually would not be opposed to this being the women's segment on Rampage for the time being. I'd much prefer seeing Serena kill chicks in 2 minutes than watching Jade Cargill stink up the ring for 10 plus minutes. So if Serena ends up becoming the primary focus of the women's division on Rampage, great. At least it'll give me something to look forward to on the show every week. Meanwhile, Britt and Thunder Rosa can get the focus on the other station, and everyone else can kick rocks. And the main event was Jay White versus Trent Beretta. And All they needed was Tony Nese and the split screen, and I think you'd have the perfect case for all three guys bearing resemblance in some kind of family tree. Seriously, if you guys don't believe me, do yourself a favor and just Google like 3 separate images of Jay, Trent, and Tony. Tell me those guys don't look like carbon copies of one another. And again, I have not watched a Jay White match in a couple years. I'm trying to come up with the best way I can describe what it's like watching him. He's not the most exciting guy to watch in the ring, but everything that I've ever seen out of Jay, I usually do not have any qualms with. He's got good basics. He takes what he does seriously. His timing's good. He's got a decent look. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say he's like a 5-tool player or anything like that, but he's someone that I would buy as like an upper mid-card guy in AEW. I'm sure I'll hate him as soon as they book him in a match with Orange Cassidy, because you know what's going to happen. You know, Tony's sitting there with his figures right now, and he's just salivating at the idea of Jay White versus Orange Cassidy on AEW TV. But I really enjoyed this match for what it was. The commentary during the thing was another issue. It's just... I don't even know how to address it at this point, because I've basically come to the conclusion now that AEW is never going to branch out beyond their niche audience, so I don't know, maybe I should just accept the fact that most people already understood the New Japan references and all the wrestlers that Jay White has history with over there, but I'm just like trying to put myself in the shoes of a casual viewer that like tunes in to watch wrestling on a Friday night, and I don't know, maybe they're watching SmackDown and they change the channel during a commercial and they just so happen to catch Rampage. And meanwhile, you got Excalibur and Chris Jericho talking about Jay's history with Kazuchika Okada, the matches with Hiroshi Tanahashi, the fact that he's a Grand Slam champion, former IWGP champion, and like, the only thing I can think is, why do these people just assume that every wrestling fan is going to know what these guys are talking about? Like, it's one thing to reference New Japan and talk about Jay White being a former IWGP heavyweight champion. But it's another thing to just name drop a bunch of guys from another company and just presume that everyone watching knows what these guys are talking about. And that everyone knows why Jay White has beef with them, what the storyline was, why it was so significant. None of it's ever explained. Now, when they brought up the fact that Jay White's a 9-year veteran to the business, that is something they should have expanded on a little more. Maybe talk a little more extensively about who he trained with, you know, what it was that allowed for Jay White to garner so much early success in the business at a young age, blah, blah. Or, God forbid, if you're going to bring up the New Japan stuff, how about, oh, I don't know, a fucking video package? Maybe show some highlights of Jay White's matches with Okada and Tanahashi, him winning multiple titles in New Japan. Maybe show some early Ring of Honor highlights. Give us something, some way of understanding the references. Not in AEW, though. No, of course, everyone's going to automatically know what the announcers are talking about at all given times. Because the presumption is if you watch AEW, that also means that you watch New Japan, Ring of Honor, and Impact, and all the other garbage indie feds out there. But anyway, getting back to the match for a minute. I thought both guys had a good, solid main event. Again, I like the way White carries himself and he works his matches. He's not a flippy-dippy, no-sell gymnast. You know, he gets the basics. He paces everything well. He sells when he needs to sell. He's got good facials. He's not so honed in on trying to get his shit in. And, you know, he even works like a traditional heel should work. I like the 1-2 punch and elbow exchanges at the end. You know, both guys were taking the brunts of the shots and they sold it for a second before laying into one another again, so that was good. And I even liked the finishing spot. You know, Trent went for the over-the-shoulder pile driver, but Jay fought out of it and hit the Blade Runner, and boom, 1, 2, 3. You know, they kept the Orange Cassidy antics to a bare minimum, didn't overstay its welcome in the end, and well, I fucking know they're going to go there because Tony can't help himself. He's got this weird, unhealthy fixation on Orange Cassidy in AEW for whatever reason. It's almost on par with Dave Meltzer's obsession with Kenny Omega at this point. But I'll give Jay White his credit now because I know I won't be saying the same thing when I see him wrestle Orange Cassidy in the coming weeks. But all in all, I would say that this show ended up being a lot better than I thought it would be going in. The worst part was the opener, but once that was out of the way, the rest of the show was fine. I like the finish to the Hobbs-Dante match. The Serena Deeb squash was exactly what it needed to be. The main event was good. I'm still going to keep pushing and advocating for them to be thinking about ways to spice the show up more instead of just following the typical match formula. Dynamite at least had a couple good solid promo segments interjected throughout the night to keep it fresh. And I'm not saying that they need to make this show a sole non-wrestling program. I would like to see more story-driven video packages and maybe a couple sit-down interviews, but, that's all personal preference. Ideally, the biggest concern for them going forward is to get this show out of the 10 p.m. Eastern time slot on Friday. Obviously with this one airing earlier in the evening, maybe they'll see a little bit of a bump in overall viewership, but the 10 Friday night slot is called Death TV for a reason. If I were Tony, I would be doing everything in my power to either get TNT to agree to a new time slot or, just find another network if they're not willing to accommodate. I know Dynamite is the premier show, but, Rampage technically is supposed to be the secondary show. And right now, Rampage doesn't even feel like that. It feels more like a Shotgun Saturday Night or a WWF Heat show more than anything. There's virtually no star power ever booked for the program. It's mostly matches, most of which are never good. And I keep going back to what I've been saying about this show for weeks now. It's not must-see TV. It's not something that feels like an important show that we need to go out of our way to watch. The easiest way to fix it is to get out of that death slot, but okay, if you're stuck there for the foreseeable future, at least get some more name power on the show. Promote a CM Punk or Bryan Danielson promo. Book them in a match occasionally. Get your fucking world champion on the show. Push for some featured content instead of trying to cram it all and blow it off on Dynamite every week. I really am trying to be as constructive as I can, but, it's so hard to do so when it almost feels like AEW is just waving a white flag and saying, we give up. This is Rampage. We're not drawing in the viewership, so this is what you get. I don't know, it just feels like a quitter's attitude more than anything. All right, so I'm going to move on to NWA Powerrr from February 17, 2022. And before we get too deep into this, let me take a minute or two to go over some of this NWA stuff. So I said I was going to review the Power Trip show, if I could find a replay of it, since I could not catch the live feed last weekend. From what I've been able to gather, based on the research I've done, it looks like most of these matches are going to be aired on the upcoming NWA shows anyway. So I'm not going to make a big stink out of trying to find an illegal stream of the show if I'm just going to end up seeing the matches air for free anyway. As of right now, I know the main spoiler for the show, which sucks, unfortunately. Although if you watched last week's recap of Powerrr that I did briefly note the possibility of them doing a world title switch and me being okay with it, despite the fact that I'm not a Matt Cardona fan by any stretch. So, yeah, Cardona beat Trevor for the NWA world title. As of this show, he was not sporting the belt, so I presume that match will end up airing in the next couple weeks. And I'll go into more detail once we get there. There was also apparently another title change in the spoilers. I don't know if that ended up being the national heavyweight title or the women's title. For the love of God, I hope it's the national title. I think Camille apparently wrestled Taryn Terrell for the belt in the tapings, and oh man, if they put the belt on Taryn, Lord fucking help me in the rest of that women's division. But like I said, spoilers are out now. I tried to avoid them the best I could, but it's the nature of the beast in 2022. You try to avoid them like the plague, and evidently they either show up in your news feed or the suggest recommended article listings, and you're just like, well, fuck. Nothing I can do about it now. Again, the world title change is really not all that shocking to me in the grand scheme of things, but I don't want to get too far into that now. I'll wait until we actually see the match air. So with that out of the way, let's get into this episode of Powerrr, which probably won't take all that long. This is a really bad show, and there really wasn't a whole lot to report on it in the end. Our first match was the British Invasion versus Fable Jake and Jaden Roller, which inadvertently turned out to be the highlight of the show looking back at it. This was a match straight out of the mid-'80s. Doug Williams and Nick Aldis are the two experienced veterans wrestling two completely dork schlubs. They're greener than goose shit, and they did not stray away from making that known in this match. Fable Jake is fucking atrocious. He's like perfect jobber straight out of the power plant level of horrible. He has some of the worst fake punches I think I've ever seen. Like, he's worse than Jade Cargill. And I'm not even trying to be facetious about that. There were some comically horrible double team spots in this match, including a spot where Aldis and Williams tried for the double catapult spot, and they mistimed it so bad, the job guys basically ended up having to adjust their motion mid-move to make it look like they even came close to making contact. That all said, Doug Williams is still the fucking man. The mat holds and submission techniques that guy comes up with are so much fun to watch. I would pay good money to see him lock up with a Roderick Strong or a Finn Balor or even like a Zack Sabre Jr. just to see what those guys could come up with for holds on the mat. Babyfaces won with the Chaos Theory diving elbow combo. I would highly encourage you to go watch this solely based on the entertainment value alone of how bad it was. But aside from that, there was nothing to write home about. Tutti Lin versus Marty Bell. This match was also pretty bad, but the story here is pretty much the main takeaway. They did the match, was it either last week or a couple weeks back? They did Kylie Ray and Allison Kay, and Kylie ended up getting the pin on Allison, and vice versa here. Tutti ended up getting the pin on Marty. So obviously they're going down the route of doing the tag match at some point for the belts, and that's fine. Tutti's very green and inexperienced, but Kylie's a good ring worker from what I've seen, so if they actually did end up winning the belts, I would not be opposed to it. One of those scenarios where Kylie could do the bulk of the work for the team, Tutti can sell, and they can basically be like the modern-day Rock and Roll Express of the women's division. Minus the drawing power and talent. We had an interview with Scion, Austin Idol, and Mae Valentine, and they are still running with the story of trying to figure out what the masked Scion's identity is. All we know from him so far is that his father was apparently an NWA World Champion, and I guess we're intended to presume that he's implying that he was the heavyweight champion, when the reality is probably that he was just a world champion, which in NWA history basically means he could have held any of the major world titles, be it the world tag titles or the world television title. And, I really do dig this storyline because they're keeping things subtle. And from what I've been able to gather, they're really trying to keep this on the down low behind the scenes too. Wikipedia seems to insinuate that he's the former Robert Anthony or Egotistico Fantastico, depending on the promotion. But the weird thing is, there's nothing in the wiki about him working as Scion in the NWA. There is some detail about him working other indie promotions, as well as apparently doing a couple squashes in AEW a couple years back. But there's zero mention of his NWA work. Could be a clever tactic on their part to keep things really hush-hush, so It is a very intriguing story. I think the payoff will be interesting if they end up doing the mask reveal. They have not done anything yet in terms of like mask versus title with him and Tyrus, so I could see that being a future direction they go if they're not done wrapping up that feud yet. Natalia Marcova versus Genocide was also bad. Not going to spend too much time burying this one 10 feet under. As soon as both girls did the old skip lockup hold, like pretty much every girl is trained to do in WWE anymore, I pretty much knew where this one was going. I think the problem with this one is that both of these girls are rarely ever featured in any major capacity on TV to begin with. Like, I've seen them do promos with these two on the show, but I'm not clear on what their beef is with one another. Genocide, I think... Didn't she just split from Taryn Terrell not that long ago? And again, they never really explained where that all came from. Like, they both got a decent look, but... yeah, I just wasn't feeling this. Finish was Genocide giving Natalia the apron powerbomb, and both girls got counted out. Announced by Kyle Davis as, "The ref has determined this is a double countout." You don't say, Kyle. I wonder how that would have been determined. What do we have next? Christy James versus Molina. God, what the fuck is with all the girls' matches this week? We sure I didn't accidentally chime into an episode of Shimmer or something? This is also very bad. And I think I remember why the show was pretty awful this week. Can someone please teach people how to run the fucking ropes? Like, I'm not just calling the women out for this, because I see the same thing from the men in the business today, too. In fact, something I jotted down in the opening match and failed to mention. Terrible rope running basics from the job guys. No one knows how to run the ropes in the business anymore, but everyone can do backward 640 corkscrew splashes. And that's honestly right there how you can tell most of the young kids grew up in the business watching wrestling. It's like, the ones that actually master the basics and learn how to actually work competent matches, those are usually the ones that watched and studied the old school content. All the trampoline gymnast spot monkeys that don't know a lockup from a hiccup. Pretty safe to say those are the ones that probably idolize the beta bucks. Whoever laid out the taping schedule for this Powerrr show did a horrible job. Like, last week they had one relatively good women's match spread out on an hour show. This week they had 3 girls matches back to back to back, and none of them were any good. Like, I'm not even saying they can't do multiple women's matches on one show, but I mean, for God's sake, can you at least space them out appropriately? The first 10 minutes of the show I'm watching NWA Wrestling, and the next 15 I'm watching a glorified Glow episode. Matt Cardona versus Victor Benjamin was exactly as Velvet Sky described Cardona on commentary. Actually, hold on a sec. I think I still might have that drop somewhere. Yeah, there it is. And again, this is obviously taped before the title change, so Cardona did not come out with the belt here. It, was what it was. Short squash to give Cardona a win. Nothing really to say about it, other than the fact that it was indeed very boring. And then we got the finals of the Team War Dilly Bob. It's the End in Rodney Mack versus Strictly Business and El Rudo. And I think I mentioned this last week after they had set the tables for the finals. I still had no idea who I was supposed to cheer for in this match. I know for a fact that Tom Latimer and Chris Adonis are heels. El Rudo, I guess by association, would be considered a heel. The End, I could have sworn were heels on this show not that long ago. Rodney Mack, I have no idea. I mean, we've only seen him like twice on the show. I remember he did an angle with Jack Stane a while back, so maybe by default that would make him a babyface. I still have no clue. It was a passable main event as far as wrestling goes. I think my biggest concern watching it was seeing how they would book Latimer and Adonis, factoring in that they have upcoming featured matches with the Power Trip tapings. Luckily, they made sure to protect both guys. It ended up boiling down to Latimer and Adonis against Odinson. Odinson was in control. Teasing was about to put the match away. And as Latimer's laying on the mat, calling for the officials to come over and check on him, Adonis hits the apron and puts Odinson in the master lock. And, well, okay, this actually didn't make a damn lick of sense when you think about it for more than 3 seconds, but here's what happens. The official catches Adonis on the apron, and he starts counting for him to break the master lock hold, and Adonis does, and then the ref ejects him anyway. Eject, disqualified, I still don't really know. I presume he was DQ'd, but Kyle Davis never made mention of it, probably because he was just as confused as I was. So Latimer and Odinson are doing some back and forth wrestling for a minute. Latimer works over his shoulder in the neck area, ends up dodging a charge in the corner, and hits the pile driver for the win. So allegedly, Strictly Business and El Rudo win $30,000. And I said allegedly because there was nothing presented to them by the end of the show. There was no check, there was no award, it was just to the credits. So I will go on a limb and presume they get their money in their next virtual deposit in their bank account. Or maybe it'll be paid out in crypto. It'll just say $30,000 bonus. And they can decide how they want to divide it amongst themselves. So, yeah, that was apparently Billy Corgan's Team War gimmick. Idea. Match. Thing. Cool. Good effort. I would like to sit here and say that I have anything else to add about it, but I really don't. I don't really know what the pay bonus does for any party involved in terms of story direction. Do Latimer and Adonis get a guaranteed future tag team title shot? I don't know. Because, I mean, I've seen them do this story in wrestling before where they'll do some kind of tournament or series and the winners get like a big bonus pay if they win. And I don't know. It's like as a fan, you're just left thinking after it's over, okay, and what happens after they win the money? Do we get to see vignettes of them spoiling it on casinos or buying fancy cars or an extended paid vacation? Or are we just supposed to forget about it 3 weeks from now like nothing ever happened? Guess we'll wait and find out. Yeah, like I said, the show sucked. And it's not even entirely to blame for the bad women's matches. Formatting and layout for the show was just abysmal from top to bottom. There was a good amount of wrestling in the hour, but I mean, aside from the bits and pieces in the main event, none of it was any good. Story-wise, not a whole lot was advanced outside the Scion stuff. Not a lot of interesting promo work worth talking about either. I presume next week we'll start to see some of these Power Trip tape matches come into play, so I guess I'll have more to talk about in the upcoming weeks, but this one, not so much. So that then will take us to Impact Wrestling's No Surrender 2022 pay-per-view event. And we are told from the onset from Tom Phillips that on this show, and I quote, "The landscape of the business will change tonight." And every time I hear a wrestling company mention this, the first thing I immediately ask is, why? What on earth is going to happen on this show that is going to cause a seismic shift in the wrestling landscape? Maybe 12 or 13 years ago, you fuckers had a chance to change the wrestling landscape. In 2022, not so much. And judging how the main event went down, you could also pretty much make the case that the announcers spoiled the finish 3 hours before Downbeat. But we will get to that in due time. And I know I joked at the beginning of the show today about how Impact still be Impact, and of course it would not be an Impact pay-per-view if we did not have multiple technical issues and or gaffes throughout a 3-hour time frame. The most notable one being the pre-tape in the back where Team Impact are having a discussion prior to their match, I presume going over a game plan, and all the while they cut to the pre-tape and we hear nothing coming through the audio feed. It's about 15 to 20 seconds of dead air time. We see mouths moving, but we have no idea what they're saying or what is going on. And they managed to fix this about halfway through during the interview, where Rhino was speaking midway through a sentence. I believe there was also a pre-tape later on with the girls where they had shot the angle and they went to try and cut to a video package before an upcoming match, and you could audibly hear the girls in the background saying, "Yeah, nice job, good take." Really is like watching 1999 Nitro all over again. Yay, Bush League Wrestling production. In 2022. You think sometime they would get a clue, but nope. Some things really do never change when it comes to this business. And I'll just go ahead and point this out. I was purely watching the show with a fresh mind. I have not followed any Impact in the lead up to this show. I had no idea who the champions were going in, what the card was, what the key stories here are, nothing. This was 100% casual viewing experience, and grading that on a scale of how they did informing me as to what was going on throughout the night, well, that kind of depends. They ran down a card at the beginning of the show, which was good, and Tom Phillips and Aiden English tried to give a brief oversight of the storylines. Let's just say when the primary story is centered around a main event angle of a Ring of Honor invasion type deal, and I did not figure that out until the video package before the match, that's an epic fail. However, given the fact that this is not 2001, and to my recollection, there's never been a successful invasion angle done in any wrestling company in the entire history of the business, a Ring of Honor versus Impact Wrestling invasion in 2022, probably not going to keep me awake at night not knowing that until 5 minutes prior to bell time. And I did take some extensive notes on things throughout the show, but I probably will not go as in-depth as I normally do with, say, like AEW or NWA. I'm not following the product diligently at the moment, so a lot of this stuff I kind of just took with a grain of salt. Going to do my best to be constructive and impartial, but also try to have a little bit of fun at their expense because, well, even with the change of the guard in terms of management and programming, it's still Impact at the end of the day. And for 20 years now, it's been a lot of the same when it comes to how I feel about that product as a whole. The first match was an X Division #1 contenders match. Chris Bay versus Ace Austin versus Jake something. No, not making that name up. Versus Speedball Mike Bailey. And again, I say, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Been sitting here on the podcast making all the former TNA X Division no-sell spot fest match jokes, and what's the first match I see when I tune into an Impact pay-per-view? An X Division no-sell spot fest. It was 4 indie guys doing a bunch of choreographed flips for a while. It was all action. Not a lick of anything made sense. No one sold a fucking thing. It was, oh, classic X Division. What can I say? Crowd loved it. Can't deny that. And if I didn't see something equivalent to this every week on AEW TV, I'd probably spend more time burying it into the ground. Jake something is, well, he's something. I guess he's Impact's modern-day Samoa Joe in the X Division, where he's a more powerful-looking guy that can do a couple cool athletic things, so ergo, he gets to compete in the X Division. And he won in the end, so he gets a guaranteed title opportunity. Because again, everyone in the business is apparently bound by contract to say title opportunity instead of title shot. So that was the opener. A bunch of guys did a bunch of ooh-ah stuff, and some of it looked cool, some of it looked completely ludicrous. Most of it looked very indie. Our hoss fight match for the show was Jonah versus Black Taurus. Jonah rocked the former Bronson Reed of NXT fame, loose term fame. There were some weird audio issues during this match. It started off all right, but about midway through the match, the commentators got noticeably quieter. And actually, it happened once or twice more during the matches on the show where it almost felt like they were trying to overcompensate to drown out the ring squeaking by trying to turn down the main audio feed for a while. Like, at first I thought it was my earbuds whacking out, but then the match was over, and when they cut to the back to the pre-tapes, the audio was perfectly fine. Black Taurus is pretty agile guy for a big guy. Normally I don't advocate for bigger guys to do the lucha stuff unless it's the finish. Given the fact that I'm not really invested into the product, though, it didn't bother me as much as it probably should have. But there were elements to this match that kind of felt like I was watching one of those old Keith Lee, Donovan Dijak matches from NXT a couple years back. A couple of fun-looking spots. I definitely say it was placed right on the card after that opening bout, but still probably would have preferred the power game stuff like Jonah was doing instead of him having to stand there and take all of Taurus's tope dives and top rope splashes. Just looked really hokey at times. But Jonah won with the top rope splash. Fine match overall, minus the nitpicks of Taurus's carny looking stuff. The match of the night by far for me was Eric Young versus Jay White. And it was weird too because I think this was heel versus heel going in. Crowd pretty heavily favored Jay here though. Again, man, I know I covered this in the Rampage report, but I really dig Jay White's stuff. He's not a walking cartoon character. He doesn't do the ridiculous indie garbage. He looks like he actually hits the gym more than twice a week. Like, every time I watched a Jay White match, whether it's Ring of Honor, New Japan, now some of the stuff I've seen him do in AEW and Impact, it's been solid. And I know people probably think I'm crazy saying that this is better than the main event. And you should also know the kind of wrestling I enjoy if you've watched the podcast before. As an overall layout and structure, this was definitely my favorite wrestling match on the show. If you dig the whole spectacle crash TV element of the business, obviously you probably were prone to like the main event more. And I know I put over Jay White at the beginning, but I gotta give Eric Young his credit where it's due, man. I've always had a hot and cold relationship with Eric over the years. Granted, a lot of my disdain for him in recent times has had more so to do with the shitty booking he was dealt with in TNA. Like, especially when Russo was in charge. God, remember when they made him the deranged mental patient and he was going around fucking Orlando Jordan in his off time? Or the time he was scared of his own pyro for like a year straight? Again, man, my brain may not always be up to snuff, but I remember the stupid shit. Trust me when I tell you that. And I know Eric's run in WWE didn't turn out how he probably envisioned it would, but God bless the guy. He's still working hard and he's staying in shape. And he's a real proven commodity to the business. And, you know, while he's probably only got a handful of years left, he still looks great. And like I said, aside from the weirdness with the whole heel versus heel dynamic, I thought this was pretty good. The pile driver on the apron spot from EY, I probably could have done without that, you know, especially if it wasn't going to lead to the immediate finish. Again, like, I know the business is exposed beyond repair in 2022, but I mean, a modicum of suspension of disbelief, too much to ask. They did a couple good near falls at the finish there to keep me invested, and Eric took a great bump off that Blade Runner, too. Probably could have shaved off a few minutes at the end, you know, especially once EY got noticeably tired, but yeah, good stuff here. Generally, I was happy with what I saw. We had the Deonna Purrazzo Open Challenge for Well, one of two other companies' belts, and it was answered by someone named Miranda Elise, and she wanted a shot at the Ring of Honor women's belt, and this wasn't bad. The overly cooperative-looking lucha spots in modern wrestling matches are never not cringe. There were some pretty choppy elbow exchanges from both girls toward the middle there, but overall I didn't hate this. This was certainly better than any of the women's matches on that NWA Powerrr show. Not something I'd say was pay-per-view quality or anything, but I probably could have picked someone worse to wrestle Deonna on the show. I really didn't have anything else to say about it other than that. The Matt Cardona-Jordan Grace intergender match was an abortion to the business and was complete bullshit. And now that I know our current NWA World Champion is also doing fake-looking matches with girls on the other station and getting his ass kicked for a good chunk of it, I can say this with a full heart. Fuck you, Matt Cardona. Then we had the tag title match with Gallows and Anderson defending against the Gorillas of Destiny. God almighty, the Good Brothers. There's two names that I did not miss having to talk about with AEW every fucking week. I can't remember whose show I was listening to, but someone during a podcast said they can't think of two other guys in the wrestling business today that are less over, yet they think they're more of a bigger deal than they actually are, than Gallows and Anderson. It's like the perfect description I can think of with those guys. Like, I remember watching Gallows and Anderson in New Japan back in, 2015, 2016, right before they signed with WWE. I never thought those guys were any good. And, all they did in WWE was bore the brakes off of me. I mean, even AJ couldn't save those guys' dead-end careers. And by the way, I like how Tom's way of explaining how the Good Brothers split from the Bullet Club to go to WWE was so they could, quote, make money. Basically a watered-down way of saying WWE was offering them more money because they're the bigger entity, so Anderson and Gallows were naturally going to go where the money was. And apparently these guys were seen as sellouts to longtime New Japan followers. And GOD, I've always kind of been on the fence on. Tama Tonga I actually thought was really good in last year's G1. As a team, I don't know. It always seemed like something was off with them. Granted, their association with the Bullet Club garbage in New Japan made it virtually impossible for me to care about anything they did, especially when the Bucks were involved with it. As workers, they're usually solid, but, I've also noticed they have a tendency to overdo all the goofy antics, which is always a turnoff for me. And, this is another weird match where I really had trouble following the character dynamics. I figured the Good Brothers were heels in this match, given the backstory beforehand. But are Tonga and Loa supposed to be heels too? Because they work most of the match as heels. In fact, Gallows and Anderson were pretty much de facto babyfaces throughout the whole thing. Wrestling-wise, it was mostly fine. A little bit of choppiness with guys trying wacky-looking offense, but nothing I would deem botchamania worthy. Gallows actually hit a really innovative looking pump handle slam at one point. I've never seen that before. Instead of hoisting the guy up and dropping him back first in a power slam, he actually flipped the dude over his shoulder to take a flat back bump. And that looked really impressive. Things broke down at the end with all four guys. Chris Bay hit the ring for the 15-minute ref distraction. Gallows hit a rock bottom to Tonga Loa on the outside, which of course then caused the ref to turn his attention from the ring for another 15 minutes so Jay White could run in, kill Tonga with the Blade Runner, and I guess turn on one half of the Bullet Club for the other half of the Bullet Club. Everyone was just as shocked as the announcers were, so apparently I witnessed history here in Impact Wrestling this past weekend. Whatever. Cool. The Good Brothers aren't lighting the world on fire in any way, so I'm not really sure how Jay White aligning with them is really turning any new heads. I think my biggest issue with it, and really this didn't even occur to me until after the show was over, especially when I saw how the main event played out. Not to jump ahead, but, we ended up getting another heel swerve in the main event too. And, I mean, yeah, technically it's not written in stone anywhere that you shouldn't do more than one heel turn on the same wrestling show, but, especially when you're dealing with two relatively bigger top stars in your company, it just felt less impactful by the end. No pun intended there. And, because I don't really have an emotional investment in anything Impact's doing right now, I didn't really see this as anything other than a Bullet Club member linking arms with two guys who I guess aren't technically Bullet Club members anymore, but I mean, they still do all the same mannerisms when they were in the Bullet Club to begin with. So, I mean, I really didn't get much out of it. Who am I supposed to cheer and boo in this case? The one group of heels affiliated with the heel stable in New Japan, or the other heel stable that just pulled one over on the other heel team? Mickie James and Tasha Steelz for the Impact Knockouts title. I'm surprised that people didn't start a Let's Go Brandon chant during the ring introductions when Dave Pinzer actually name-dropped the official. And by the way, I saw this in the video package they aired before. Did they really do an Ultimate X match with the girls? Good fucking lord, I hope no one died. That sounds like a nightmare scenario to try to book that match. I used to cringe watching the normal guys do those Ultimate X matches back in the day, much less thinking about the possibility of girls doing it. But, I mean, that is the nature of the business now. The men do it, so, of course, de facto, the women have to do it. Even if it really isn't called for and makes no fucking sense. Anyway, my notes were really all jumbled for this match. I ended up writing down at the end, this was all going relatively fine until the completely garbage-ass finish. And honestly, I'll just skip to that because there really wasn't anything noteworthy to talk about in the match. What happens is, Tasha's muscle hits the ring apron. Didn't write her name down, I don't care, it's not important. Mickie goes to kick her off the apron, and then Tasha hits her with a cutter of some sort, but that's not the finish. Then Chelsea Green hits the ring to yank the girl off the apron again, and they do the dumb spot where Tasha and Mickie tie each other up with a waist lock, the go behind. Tasha tries to run Mickie into Chelsea, but Mickie stops before hitting her to make it seem like she was about to do it on purpose. That stupid angle. And then Mickie reverses the grip and then pins Tasha with a bridge. And it's one thing to do an overly scripted, planned out angle like that at the end. It's another thing when everything looks so jerky and non-fluid to get to that point where you can tell they actually had to practice this shit before doing it. It's one of those matches where it's fine without all the BS at the end, but they have to do it anyway because now everyone that books wrestling anymore thinks that things have to be overly complicated. Can't just do a match where one guy wins and the other guy loses. You have to map out this overly contrived finish, otherwise people will think it's boring. So, I didn't like that at all. Moose and W. Morrissey for the Impact World title? I'm not joking, that's actually how I posed it in my notes. Yeah. Once upon a time, Impact Wrestling World title matches featured the likes of Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, Sting, AJ Styles, you name them. In 2022, we got Moose and W. Morrissey. All right, then. By the way, do they ever explain on the show what the W stands for? William, Wilbur, Wilson? Joking aside, I did write this down here, and I thought it was appropriate to mention it given the fact of where he's come from in the last couple years. Morrissey looks so much healthier and in shape than he did several years ago. I watched that podcast he did with Chris Van Vliet a while back, and I'll say this, man. That was one of the most down-to-earth, authentic discussions I think I've seen him do with anyone. And I'm really glad he straightened himself out, and he took the initiative to work on himself because it's paid dividends for him physically. And mentally, he looks so much better than he did several years ago. Now that said, Morrissey wrestling with the necklace, pretty risky. Not sure I would support that. The match was pretty much what I determined it would be. An okay title main event for television that they expected people to pay for. And the crowd apparently thought it was awesome, but I don't know. It was good. For a big guy match, it was certainly good. Probably one of the best singles matches I've seen from Morrissey. I know he's mostly been a tag guy for most of his career, but I thought he had a relatively strong showing here. But I probably wouldn't really even cap this as like the second or even third best match on the show. Especially by the end there where Morrissey really kind of got lost and started botching spots left and right. Yeesh. Didn't look good. And I don't know, it also hit me watching this match. Your commentary team, you got Tom Phillips, Aiden English, and Brian Myers, all former WWE guys. Your title challenger for your main world championship is also a former WWE guy. It's not even like English, Myers, or Morrissey were ever considered top guys in WWE. I think you'd be stretching it if you've even tried to classify them as mid-carders. And I know the landscape of the business is different in 2022. WWE fired like a third of its overall employees in the span of the last year and a half. So evidently those guys were going to end up somewhere. It's just hard to wrap my head around the fact that these other promotions just assume that because these guys were from WWE means that they were ever any good. At least when we used to poke fun at TNA for signing all the former WWE talent over a decade ago, at least they were going after the names like Jeff Hardy and the RVDs and the Stings and the Kurt Angles of the world. But you see a lot of former WWE releases getting signed to these companies, and most of them are getting pretty heavily pushed to the top of the card. I don't know, man. Morrissey in particular, I don't know about all that. Now, granted, he didn't win. Moose is someone I've also followed on and off for a while. He definitely made a good showing for himself from what I saw in Ring of Honor years back. But even him as the Impact World Champion right now, it's just, I don't know, it just screams out, we've got no one else, so here's the closest thing we have to a top star right now. Just very bizarre watching this match. In our main event, the 10-man Ring of Honor versus Impact Wrestling Invasion match. Thingamabob. If ROH wins, they get to stay in Impact, but if Impact wins, they're banished from the company. And by the way, again, an ROH versus TNA Invasion angle, and I didn't even know the payoff was happening until the video package they aired right beforehand. Great plug, guys. And, well, let's just say when one of your main guys for the babyface team is the former Steve Cutler of the Forgotten Sons fame in NXT, probably not going to be a good night for your team. It is really odd trying to watch all these NWA, ROH, Impact, crossover guys work in different shows. It's like on one station, OGK are babyfaces. Meanwhile, here in Impact, they're part of the heel outsiders group. And by the way, I just thought about this. I don't know why this just came to my mind, but why would Impact be hesitant to allow the former Ring of Honor guys to jump ship to Impact while ROH is working their issues out for the time being? What happened to the whole Forbidden Door rule that everyone was so gung-ho about? All of a sudden, a bunch of Ring of Honor guys show up on Impact and this is sacrilege? How? People jumping ship and playing hot potato with multiple wrestling companies all over the damn place. Cardona, Christ, I think I've seen him in 7 different companies in the last month alone. All of a sudden, it's a problem when a bunch of guys show up on Impact that are considered part of another company. I can't believe Chris Sabin's still around, man. That guy still moves just like he did 20 years ago. And after all the shit that guy's put his body through over the years, it is unreal how good that guy still is. course, that's not even to mention fucking Rhino. That guy's like, what, late 40s, pushing early 50s by now? And granted, he's no Mr. Spring Chicken these days, but he's still just as much of a badass as he was 20-something odd years ago. Anyway, there was a lot of shit that happened in this match, and I'm not going to go over it in full detail. Trust me when I tell you, guys did a lot of spots. That's pretty much how you could sum up the whole thing in one liquefied sentence. How no one died in the match, I don't think I'll ever know. The spot where PCO did the senton onto Willie Mack and Rich Swann and totally crushed Swann's skull on the landing. Concussion fucking city. Surprisingly, there was a lot less choppiness in the match than I expected there to be. Like, when you factor in 10 guys doing a moves match, you had to figure there'd be a good amount of sloppiness throughout, but generally, nothing looked dramatically horrible. If you're a moves mark and you don't care about anything regarding ring psychology or coherence, probably had a ball with this one. And as soon as Eddie Edwards came down with the kendo stick, I mean, the entire fucking world could see where that was headed. Actually, I could probably have told you Eddie Edwards was turning when they announced earlier in the show that he was, quote, taken out and was not able to compete for Team Impact. Kind of makes sense if you know the history of Eddie's relationship with the Ring of Honor, but I don't know, like the execution of it kind of felt like it was one of those Russo swerves where it was so predictable it ends up not being a swerve, and anyone that didn't see it coming is an idiot. I don't know where that takes them with the whole Ring of Honor invasion thing since they won, but I don't know. And you got guys like Kenny King and even Matt Taven and Mike Bennett. They'll probably have innovative ways to pair guys up in matches. I think the only thing I honestly would have changed about like the overall layout or booking structure, I probably would have gone with the elimination style rules. I think that was a missed opportunity in terms of maybe telling a compelling face versus heel story with boiling the match down to one or two guys from the Impact team going up against the Ring of Honor guys, have the Impact team fight from underneath at a numbers disadvantage. Like, you know, even if the end goal was to put the heels over, you still could have achieved that with adding more drama of having the babyface defy the odds until the final one or two members of Ring of Honor's crew, and then you do the Eddie swerve at the end. But, I don't know, just personal preference, I guess. What's done is done. It was a fun main event if you shut your brain off and just ignore all the logic gaffes and no-sells. It was definitely an apropos finish to an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view, an overly screwy bullshit heel swerve in the main event with a clustery booked match. Just like the good old days, except in 2022, I just don't get mad about it like I did in, say, 2007 or 2008. The show was one of those shows where, again, like, you watch it in a vacuum, you don't try to overthink anything. The wrestling was mostly fine. I don't think there was anything that I would say was embarrassingly bad on the show. A little bit of sloppiness in matches here and there, but nothing like Jenna Charmel level of horrible on the show. Not even close. But again, you know, when it comes to booking and overcomplicating finishes, Impact still be Impact. It never ceases to amaze me the level wrestling companies go anymore to try and systematically overcomplicate everything they do. Like, you want to book a screwy finish on a pay-per-view? Okay, fine. Once, maybe twice. If you do a DQ, count-out, and a run-in the same night, okay, that's fine. But when you start getting to the point where you're doing 2 matches featuring heel swerves and, you know, you got another match on the show with a completely plotted out run-in sequence at the end, it just starts to feel like overkill. It starts to feel like a WWE pay-per-view is honestly what it seems like. And granted, the match finishes on this show and all the booking quirks, it's not like TNA used to be back in the day where every fucking match you'd pretty much come to expect is bullshit interference. But, you know, even the stuff I saw on this show, I'd probably still deem too much. Would I recommend checking out the show in your spare time? Not really. If you like matches where guys do moves, you might enjoy some of the matches on there, possibly excluding the girls' content. But if you like your wrestling shows to make sense and err on the side of logic from time to time, you could probably pass on this one. I would like to check out their next live pay-per-view in the coming weeks. I think they said the next one's the Sacrifice show on the 5th of March. And I mean, that's not too far out from where they are now. So I'll probably have a little more context with story follow-up going into that show. So we'll see. Could be good or bad depending on how things turn out. But that'll be for down the road. As we close things out, again, make sure you guys subscribe, comment, and like the show. I will be back this coming Friday for our retro review series continuation of NWA World Championship Wrestling. And we will be back to recapping World Class Championship Wrestling as well. We also have the Dynamite Report on the table, so it'll be a back to normal Friday show. Until then, take care. Peace out.